In this video, you'll be watching me build the largest and most complicated cabinet I'd ever constructed, while I talk about the mistakes I made that not only cost me materials, time, and money, but almost cost me a friendship. I have been a woodworker for a little over 3 years now, and I know that like most things technical, the only way to get better is to continually challenge myself and understand that mistakes will happen. To quote Italian author Giacomo Casanova, "One who makes no mistakes makes nothing." And so knowing that this cabinet was not only going to be the largest I'd ever built, but also include epoxy, joinery, and even techniques I'd never done before, I was ready for any mistakes that would come my way. So what were they? We'll get to that in a sec, but let's rewind a bit. In my last video, I had mentioned that I just moved into a larger workspace, and by the time I started this build, I was already a few months into working here, and honestly, I was loving it. One of the big pros of the new space was definitely the extra room to move around, and being able to accept larger, more challenging projects. But there was a big downside. If you've read the About section on my website, you would have read that I give credit to Antonetti's Hair for Men in Long Beach for really jump-starting my woodworking journey and for the creation of Inner Cambium. Not only have they been a client of mine for years now and have trusted me to outfit their new barbershop, but Des, the owner, has become a close friend of mine over the last 8 years. So I might be a little biased, but they really do give the best haircuts in Long Beach. Since I knew the cabinet portion of the build was going to be the more complicated part of the project, I wanted to start with the 4 sliding doors. They were to be cut from this slab of walnut from Street Tree Revival, and I was to make them river table style with epoxy down the middle connecting the 2 live edges. This was something I felt pretty confident with, as I've done river tables in the past, and so everything was going according to plan, but then I made not one, but 2 mistakes. The plan was to do 2 separate pours, a tinted base layer, and then a clear layer on top to showcase the live edge. But I didn't give enough time for the first layer of epoxy to firm up enough to receive the next pour, and I also didn't turn a fan on or even monitor the ambient temperature of the room after the second pour. This ended up with the epoxy overheating. And when it overheats, the exothermic reaction happens too quickly, resulting in a cure that ended up bubbling, smoking, and cracking. This cost me a little over $400 worth of epoxy and, of course, hours of my time. The only way I knew to fix this was to let it finish curing, carve out all the epoxy back down to the bare wood, and start all over. This was a lot of work to remove all the epoxy and redo the pour. I was also a bit anxious the second time around here with fear that I would screw it up again, so I was careful, extra careful, and double-checked my work throughout the entire process. Remember when I had mentioned there was a big downside about the new workshop? Well, the big downside was the cost of rent. I was working out of my 1-car garage before, so it was basically no overhead. Now, with the large rent bill coming around every month, I would be lying if I wasn't scrambling to find more work. And luckily, I did find more work. Mainly smaller commissions with a fast turnaround. But in the process of marketing myself to find more sales and being a one-man shop to finish these smaller commissions, this is when I made my fatal mistake. Now, if you're also a small business owner, you might guess what I'm about to say. That the fatal mistake I made was biting off more than I can chew, having too much on my plate, and not hiring help to delegate other tasks to. In part, this was true. I did think I could manage everything. The building, the production, the marketing, the sales, all the social media posts. And the truth was, I couldn't work on the cabinet while trying to finish these smaller commissions. I was definitely in a bit of a panicked survival mode with rent coming around every month, so I turned my focus on these little projects that had a fast turnaround and ended up putting this cabinet on the back burner. But that truly wasn't the fatal mistake. I felt like Des, my friend, would understand my situation and be okay with the delay on the delivery date. And he actually was, but the fatal mistake was me never telling him the situation right off the bat and leaving him in the dark for months. I would occasionally mention that I needed more time, but months and months went by and I just continued to post stories about my latest commissions and all the new things I was doing on social media, all while Des was wondering what happened to his cabinet. I didn't take the time to just be open and honest with him, and essentially took for granted our friendship and just assumed he would be fine with it. Now, in the past, Des and I have had great conversations about business, and I've always admired him as a business owner, so to be honest, I think I felt a little embarrassed to say that I was struggling. But my lack of communication with not only a longtime client, but a friend, definitely caused resentment to build and a rift in our relationship that I was honestly completely oblivious to until I received a phone call one day. After receiving a call from Des, who was on the edge of wanting his money back, we had the hard conversation that was inevitable. He was his calm and collected self, obviously upset, but more disappointed in me than anything. He thought of me as a close friend, but he said he didn't feel like he was being treated how one would treat a close friend. So after we talked for a bit, and a long due apology from me, we made amends and decided to still continue on with the build. The call ended with a bit of relief, but more importantly, our friendship's still intact, and maybe even just a little closer. It shook me out of my tunnel vision survival mode that I was in, and reminded me that a friendship should never be taken for granted, and that a key pillar to a strong foundation needs to be built on honesty and transparency. Now that the air was clear and I regained focus on the tasks at hand, I could finish this project. There's a saying in woodworking that the sign of a great woodworker is how well they can fix their mistakes. We all make mistakes, in woodworking and in life. It's inevitable when you try something new and push yourself out of your comfort zone, or when you take something for granted and just make assumptions. But it's how well you own up to those mistakes, face them head on, be willing to change, and work out a solution that will help you grow not only as a woodworker, but as a person. And to be completely honest, I like to think I'm a good woodworker. But I'd rather somebody think of me as a great friend.